Lindsay Weirich, also known as the Frugal Crafter, and I have thousands of tutorials on painting and crafting on my blog and YouTube channel, so please do check it out when you get a moment. Today we're going to be doing some watercolor painting using the Art Instructor kits from Royal and Langnickel. We're going to take an in-depth look at these in just a few minutes, but first I want to show you what we're going to paint today. We're going to start off with this landscape. It's a stream and sky, and we got clouds. We're going to be doing washes and lifting and scraping and painting and all sorts of great techniques that you can apply to paintings in the future. After we've got this one under our belt, we're going to go to a project that's a little bit trickier only because we need to draw a bit, but it's not going to be that tough, and I'm going to be with you again every step of the way, and you can always pause the video if you need to catch up. So here is our Dragonfly. Again, we're going to be doing some of the washing techniques. We're going to be sketching with our paintbrush, and it's really not as tricky as it looks, but you're going to be building on your skills and gathering tips and tricks to help you in your upcoming projects as well. So without further ado, let's go over to the table where we're going to work and take a closer look at our painting kit. Okay, let's take a look at our work surface and our workstation. I have just a mat covering my table to protect it. It's not really that necessary with watercolors, but you might want to have a piece of cardboard down or something. I've got a water bucket here, and this is a divided water bucket, so actually I have space to clean my brush with these ridges, and then I have a place for fresh water. But I'll tell you what, 2 margarine tubs filled with water will be just fine. You don't have to go and buy a water tub for that. Use what you have. Canning jar, anything like that will be fine. I recommend having a piece of paper towel or 2 on your workspace so that you can wet your brush, and we'll need it for lifting our clouds. You're going to need some watercolor paper, and I'm using 5x7 pieces to do our little projects that we're going to work on today. Now the cool thing about watercolor paint is that you can squirt it out in a palette, and if you don't use it all up, it's absolutely fine because it will be able to be reused when you add a little water. So here are the colors we're going to use. These are all Royal and Langnickel essential colors. I've got lemon yellow. I've got, this is one of my favorite colors, sap green. It's such a lovely earthy green. We're going to use some Prussian blue, which is a really just almost like a neutral blue. It might be a little kind of green bias, but it's a very handy blue to have. We're going to use some Crimson Red Lake, and this is like a really true pure red color. We're going to use some yellow ochre, and the label here looks like it's almost like a little greenish, but it really is not. It's really very golden yellow. You can see I'm just putting it right on top of my other colors in my palette here. If you do let your paint dry out, give it a little spritz of water before you begin, and that will help it get, nice and juicy again. And I've got a little burnt sienna, which is my favorite brown. All right, so you'll get, depending on what kit you get from Royal and Langnickel, you'll have a variety of different colors, but these basic colors are found in most kits, or you can go with one that's just similar. We're going to use a couple brushes here. I've got a number 10, which is a little bit, maybe a little bit shy of ½ inch wide, and I've got a number 5 and a number 2 round. And I'm just going to set those down. And we're going to use this palette knife to do a little texturing. If you don't have a palette knife in your kit, you could use like a cut up piece of a credit card if you want. And we'll grab that pencil because we will need to do a little sketching. And I'm going to set the rest of this stuff aside so that I have my workspace nice and clear. So what we're going to do first is do a little bit of color mixing just so we get the hang of how to use our paints. And what I do, and I'll show you a little trick, if you ever do a painting, maybe it doesn't come out that great, you can flip it over and use the back to do your color mixing exercises. I hate to throw anything away, but on the same respect, I want you to know it's just a piece of paper, and there's no reason to get upset about making a mistake, because you learn more from your mistakes than from your successes. So let me zoom into my paper here, and we'll do a little color mixing exercise. If you're right-handed, you'll probably want to have your water bucket to the right of you, and your palette either in front of you or to the right of you. Just make sure you set yourself up in a way that is comfortable. Now, one of the things I want you to know about watercolor is that the paint is kind of lazy, and it's going to go wherever it's easiest. So if I paint some water down here on my paper, the paint is going to want to go where the paper's wet because it can move easier. Okay, so if I don't want my paint to move and I want a sharp, crisp line, I'm not going to wet the paper first. So let's go by mixing our 3 primary colors and see what we get. I'm going to take some of this red and see when I go to get my color, I don't jam my brush in the middle of that dollop of color. What I do is I add some water and I just kind of wiggle it there on the edge. Okay, I don't want clumps. So see, if I'm out here on the edge and I, paint, my lines are going to stay where I put them. But if I bring it here where I have the water, look, it wants to flow and blend. Okay, so keep that in mind. If you want a sharp, crisp line, paint on dry paper. If you want blended lines, blended shapes, paint on wet paper. We're going to be starting our first painting, the landscape, on a wet piece of paper, and then we'll be letting it dry as we go. So now let's take a little bit of this yellow here. Notice how I'm just kind of wiggling it in the edge of the paint. And I'm going to add some of this. I'll add it over here. We'll get into the puddle of water a little bit, and we'll also do some fine lines. This is a great technique to practice. And this is the larger of the 2 brushes. Holding it straight up and down so it makes a 90-degree angle with your paper, and then just kind of gently letting the tip of the brush glide across the paper. It will give you really good control. I'm just going to add a little bit more of that into the wet paper. And then I'm going to grab some blue. Notice how I'm cleaning my brush between colors so I don't contaminate the palette. See, I want that nice, almost like a milky consistency to my paint. I don't want big globs. And I'm going to add some of this down here. My paper's already drying because of all my my studio lighting here. And now I want to do a little mixing. So I'm going to move some of this up here to the green, to the yellow, and we'll get some nice green. Blue's a lot stronger, so I'm going to add a little more yellow to that so we can see what kind of green we can make. That's pretty and vibrant. And then we'll do a little mixing there. We'll see what kind of purple we can make. These are called tertiary colors when you mix your primaries together. Get some cool stuff here. Add a little more red in there because I don't think I have enough to mix. Oh, that makes a gorgeous, gorgeous purple. Look at that. And then we'll mix those 2 and get some lovely orange, hopefully. I need to add a little more pigment though. I didn't put enough to begin with. And that's something you're gonna learn. Okay. So there, these are pretty good primary colors. Let me add a little more yellow to that because I know it's not looking too orange on the camera. These are some nice primary colors that you can mix a lot of your other colors with. I think it's a really great idea to get used to your brushes and your paints before you begin a painting. Now let's look at what our brushes will do. So we have 2 rounds and a flat, and you may have some other shaped brushes in whatever kit you purchase. So I would like you to get them out now and start seeing what kind of marks you can make. And I'm going to use the blue because that's going to show up really well on camera. And again, I'm just kind of getting my brush into that paint, and I'm going to go and make a straight line. Now another cool thing you can do with a brush like this is to make kind of like ribbons. Another cool thing you can do with a brush like this is to do side loading. So what you want to do is you wash your brush and you gently lay it on your towel and let a lot of the waters kind of go away. And then you load one corner in your paint. And then when you paint it, you get this lovely gradiated wash there. You get this kind of line that's darker on one side and goes lighter. And it's a great way to shadow around something. So those are some of the things you can do with a flat brush. A flat brush is also handy for wetting your paper before you begin a painting project. Now with our round brush, you can do, and a round brush is my favorite. If I had to pick just one brush, I'd probably get like one a little bit bigger than this and a round. So if you press on your brush, like you can get a nice wide line, but as you lift, look, your line gets really, really fine. And that's with the larger of the 2 brushes. Let's try it with a smaller brush. Getting to know your materials is a great way to break the ice when you begin a painting project, because you can do this on a scrap of paper. You can do it on a piece of copy paper if that's what you have. So you can see just by a little practice you can get some really nice fine lines, as well as getting broader washes. See, with that same brush. So have fun and experiment with your brushes. Now let's begin our first project. We're going to start by using a 5x7 piece of watercolor paper here. And if you want, you can tape this down to a piece of cardboard or whatever you have to work with. I am going to just lay it on my table because I think it's going to be fine like that. And what I'm going to do is use my pencil to sketch on a design. So what I'm going to do is start by putting the horizon line about 1/3 of the way down my paper. I can even line it up with my grid here on my mat if I want to. And then I'm going to draw kind of like almost like an S shape, just a wiggly line there. And then over here I am going to kind of bring it in and bring it kind of back out wide. So this is going to be our water area. And I feel like that's pretty much all I need. I could sketch in the mountains back here. You can if you like. If you don't feel like you need that definition, you don't have to. But that's pretty much all we're gonna draw in there right now. Now I want you to take your flat brush and we're gonna wet everything above the horizon line. We're even gonna go over that mountain that we drew in there. So we're just wetting the paper with clear water. Now if you choose to tape this down to a board with masking tape and you make a nice even border, you'll have a pretty matte on your picture when you're done. It's completely up to you though. And by taping your paper down, it will help it from keeping it from warping. But I'm not that concerned with that really. I think we're going to be fine. This is a small piece of paper. If you're painting this painting larger, like say an 8x10 or 11x14 or something, then I would recommend taping it down. Okay, so what you want is your paper to look shiny. So if I tip it to the light, can you see how that's nice and glossy looking? Now we're going to add some of the blue paint. We're going to make sure we don't have any clumps, so we're mixing it with the water here on the edge of our palette that's higher. We're going to add the blue right to the top edge of our painting, and we're just going to use horizontal brush strokes to drag it down to the horizon. Now if you didn't put as much paint on as I did, you might have to go back in and add some more. I could kind of actually tap it around and kind of help the paint blend a bit, but don't fuss with it too much. Now we're going to take a paper towel and we're going to ball it up, okay, and we're going to make some clouds. Okay, so you just want to kind of press it into your paper here and there. I like to make larger clouds at the top and have them smaller as they go down. Just try not to fuss with it too much. You really can't mess it up. Just, you know, you could, well, maybe you can mess it up by overdoing it. Just try to keep it really random. I try to make my clouds a little bit flatter on the bottom and a little poofier on the top so it looks a little more realistic. All right, and then we have to leave that alone to dry. So while that's drying, we can actually paint the water. Now the water is going to be kind of reflective of the sky. So what we're going to do now here, in fact, you know what? I think I'm actually going to just blot a little bit away here at the horizon line. We want to make sure that we're not going to get paint against any of that wet paint that we've just put there, because if we do, then we could have our water color going into the sky color. So I'm going to start by wetting the water area, because remember what we said at the beginning, the paint's lazy. It's only going to go wherever the paper's wet. It's going to go the easiest. It's going to take the easiest path. And my brush is a little bit blue, but it's not a big deal because we're going to paint this blue. Okay, and I also want to keep in mind that whatever's in the sky is going to be reflected in the still water here, so I've got to be kind of careful when I lift up anything in the water. Now I'm going to start by adding my watercolor, my blue, Prussian blue, down here towards the bottom. I am keeping my paper flat for this, and I'm just going to keep on filling in this with blue. It's not going to be so gradiated, it's going to be more of a flatter wash, meaning the same shade all the way through mostly. We will be going in and adding shadows and reflections of the grasses and kind of the trees and foliage and stuff later on, but for right now we just want to get pretty much a flat blue color. Keep in mind that this is going to dry lighter because it's watercolor. Watercolor dries lighter than when we apply it. It's kind of the opposite of acrylics. Acrylics dry darker, but watercolor dries lighter. Okay, we don't need to fuss with this too much. I am going to go ahead and lift out a few clouds, so I'm just kind of thinking, well, that one would be probably about there, so I'm just going to lift out a little bit there. That one, let's see, where would that one be? That one might actually be a little bit right there. Doesn't have to be perfect, just try to get approximately there. And now we need to let this dry before we go on to the next step. Do you see what I mean about it drying a little bit lighter? Now we're going to go in and work on our land areas. Again, I'm going to stay with my 1/2 inch flat or number 10 flat, and I like to work with like a larger brush as I begin and then work a little bit, work with a smaller brush as I finish up and add details. So I'm going to start way back here, and I'm going to start by wetting this land area. I'm actually going to go a little bit lower than what I drew because I left that white gap for the when I painted the water in, and I want to kind of get that covered. And then I'm going to use some of the colors that we squeezed out onto our palette. I want to have a little bit of a highlight up here at the top, so I'm just going to go in with a little bit of that lemon yellow. Add that to the top. Then I'm going to go in maybe a little bit more. Then I'm going to go in with some sap green. I put a little ceramic tile here in case I want to mix some colors. You could use a ceramic dish or a piece of, plastic. Even the lid of, your painting kit, if it came in a plastic container, it doesn't really matter. Just something so if you need to mix up some colors, you have some room. I'm adding the sap green in here. I'm really just kind of dabbing it in and letting the water kind of pull the paint where it wants to go. Now, because this is the furthest furthest away land in the picture, I want it to be a little bit cooler in color. So what I'm going to do is actually take some of that green over here on my tile. If you have an extra well in your palette, you can use that as well. And I'm mixing a little bit of the Prussian blue. And that's going to give me a cooler green, and it's going to make it look a little more further away. And I'm adding some of that to like the bottom of our hills here, and just kind of letting it blend around. And then we're going to let that dry, and we'll come back later and add some more details to it. Now I'm going to move over to this land area. Again, I'm going to wet it. A lot of people are kind of afraid to go in with that, with the larger flat brush, but I think it's a great way to start a picture because you're less likely to get fussy and worried about it if you're starting with a big brush. Save the smaller ones for when you're finishing up. Alright, less detail to begin with, and then you refine as you go. And again, I'm going to do the same method, except this land area is going to be a little bit brighter and warmer because it's closer to the viewer. So I'm starting in with quite a bit of the lemon yellow. It's such a cheerful color, I just love it. And I'm going to go in with a little bit more of the sap green. Since I had yellow on my brush before, I didn't rinse it off because yellow is an ingredient in green, and I knew it wasn't going to really contaminate my color. I'm going to go and add this towards the bottom, let it kind of mix in. This is kind of a marshy picture, and when you have really wetlands like that, you tend to have a lot of lush green, fresh looking foliage. Now look at that. I didn't mean to do that, but I think it's a good learning opportunity. I've got kind of thick paint there because I didn't really mix it out with my water, so I'm just going to add a little water to that and break it down, break down the pigment, and then spread it around a little bit. So, that's what you do when that happens to you. It's probably going to happen to you at some point because I've been painting for 30 years and look, it happened to me. Actually, I typically will let my paint dry in my palette, and then I will just use a wet brush to reconstitute it. But sometimes if you're going to go a long period of time without painting with these paints, because they are student quality paint, and they might crack. Like if you look at that green, you can see it's kind of cracked there, that first bit of green that I had, and then they can pop out of the palette sometimes. So you know, just keep that in mind if you choose to do that. Now I want to have a little bit of like maybe dirt color down here, so what I'm going to do is add some of that burnt sienna, which is that brown color that we squirted out. Go ahead and get some just on the kind of chisel edge of my brush, and then I'm just going to touch the chisel edge to the edge of this landmass and let the gravity kind of just pull it, let the water just kind of pull it up. Try not to fuss with this too much. Alright, now while this is wet, because this area is really quite juicy, what I'm going to do is take my palette knife, and if you don't have one, like I said before, you could use a little piece of plastic or a butter knife or whatever you have around the house. I'm just going to scrape up some lines just to give it a little bit of texture. We're going to be painting some like reeds and grasses and stuff over it, but this will just help to give our picture a little bit more life. And something else I can do with this wet paint is I can actually drag some shadows down into the water, some reflections rather, just flicking it down, flicking some of that paint down. It's less scary to do it now when we're just beginning than it is at the end, and we will have to do a little bit more of this later, but it's nice to kind of get that kind of in our minds that that's going to happen later. It just kind of mentally prepares you for that step of the painting. Okay, now we're going to rinse off the brush. Oh, this is another thing. You never want to leave wooden handled brushes sitting in the water, so rinse it out and then set it aside. Don't let it sit, because the paint can crack and then the wood can swell underneath, and then makes the ferrules, which are the metal parts here, loose, and makes your brush very unpleasant to paint with. So what I'm going to do is again wet this area of the land here, and I think we'll just do this with straight sap green, because it's not as close as that one, it's not as far away as that one. Make sure I'm going to add a little water to that so I don't get too much on my brush. Just letting it flow. I would say these paints flow a moderate amount. You'll get some paints will flow like crazy, some won't move at all. Just depends on the different brands. I like the Royal and Langnickel paints for beginners because it's a quality paint, but it's not crazy expensive, and it's a great way to get started, especially for kids. My daughter's first watercolor set, and she's 10 now, and she was 8 when I got it for her, was the same set here that I'm using. It wasn't very expensive, but she really enjoyed it. I didn't have to worry that, you know, she was wasting expensive supplies, and she got to really just have a good time with it and yet feel like a, you know, a real artist, because she had, you know, watercolor paints and tubes like Mommy uses. So it's always good to start them young. And I'm going to paint this area here, and again I'm going to go in with the lemon yellow and then some sap green. And I'm actually going to add a little yellow ochre to that too, which is the kind of browner yellow. Love yellow ochre. It's such a nice color because it's very complementary to almost any other color you might be using. I don't know, it's like a magic color, yellow ochre. It just makes everything look fantastic. And a little sap green in here. And we can scrape up some of the pigment here like we did in the middle. So I'm going to go right out to my shadows. There. I'm going to scrape out a few things just to have a little texture in there. And the reason this works, the reason we get such little fine lines, is because it's actually scribing into the paper and kind of damaging the paper and leaving these little deposits behind. So, so that's why that works. I'm just going to go ahead and drag down some paint while I'm at it. And again, like I said, we're going to have to go over that, but it just gives us that mental awareness that that's coming. Okay, so this is what we have so far. Now we're going to go in and add some shadows to the clouds. Now this can be a little bit scary because we're going to be going in and adding gray to your clouds. So if you want, you can watch me do it, and if you decide it's not for you, you can skip that step. That is absolutely fine. But it will give you a little bit more depth in the clouds. So actually I could show you right here. This is the finished painting. You can see how it's got the gray just on the bottom of the clouds, and that one doesn't. So, you know, it's up to you whether you want to do this or not. We need to mix our gray colors. So what I'm going to do is actually use colors we've already used in our painting, because I don't like to use black from the tube. I like to mix my own grays and my own blacks. I'm going to take a little bit of this blue on my palette, make sure I don't have any clumps, wash my brush, and I'm going to grab a little bit of the burnt sienna. And I'm going to mix them together. I don't need a ton of this color, so I'm just going to kind of mix them together a little bit until I get a nice gray color. There we go. It's going to take a lot more blue than the brown. There we go. Now remember that side loading technique I showed you in our little kind of get to know our paint segment there a few minutes ago? We're going to do that. We're going to wash our brush off really good. And I'm going to just kind of like, it's almost like I'm just trying to suck the water out of one side of my brush. Then I'm going to put the edge, see, I'm just getting that the whole side of that brush. Oops, if you get any drops on the ferrule, just make sure you wipe those off. And actually I have to test it here. Let me test it on my scrap paper. Let's see what we got. I don't have enough water on there. See, I just got a fine like little hairline there. So I'm going to tap it off a shorter amount of time this time. Let's see how that looks. Oh, there we go. I can see it's going to blend. And then I'm going to turn my paper because I want to make sure I'm approaching this at a comfortable angle. And I'm using the whole flat side of my brush. I'm adding a shadow in there. So you can see the difference between that one and that one. It's quite subtle. It's more subtle than it was on my other painting. Again, now when you reload, you have to do the whole step again. You rinse your brush off, you blot it. Whoops, I just dropped water onto my painting. That's how you fix that. I think it's good to make mistakes and show you guys how to fix it. I think that helps. Okay, we're gonna wash our brush off. Okay, we're gonna remove some of the water. We're gonna put that edge of our brush into the paint. We're gonna turn our paper. And we are going to add our shadow. Whoops. I didn't check what side my brush was on. There we go. The only tutorial to have a blooper reel. There we go. That's alright. We all make mistakes. Or as I like to call them, opportunities for learning. You can always put a tree over it if you make a really bad mistake. It's a great place for a tree to go. That's how you know where the trees need to be. Whoops, I made a mistake on that cloud. It looks like a tree. That's a tree. Opportunity for a tree there. There we go. Okay. And that's all I'm going to do to the clouds because I think less is more, but it does, I think, add a lot more depth than it would have had otherwise. Okay, so now by this time our land way in the back is dry. Now here's a little trick. If you're not quite sure if your paper's dry or not, but it doesn't look shiny anymore, what you can do is like use the back of your hand or maybe like the side, this part of your hand, and touch it. And if it feels cool to the touch, it's not dry yet. But if it feels room temperature, then it's dry. So just another little trick to file away there. Okay, I am going to take my round brush and I'm going to grab some of our blue, or Prussian blue. And I'm going to grab a little bit of the sap green and make this kind of teal color. A little bit more blue there maybe. Okay, so we get that nice teal. Isn't that pretty? You can make, see, these colors are so beautiful and so pure that they mix wonderfully. Sometimes you get like a student quality paint and they're just mud. When you mix the colors together, they're mud, and that's not the case here with these Royal Langnickel kits. They're all just fantastic. And what I'm doing here is I am really just tapping in blobs, but when our painting's done, these blobs are going to look like trees in the distance, like evergreen trees kind of lined up there. So that's what we're doing here. We're just kind of tapping in. And this cool blue color, this nice tealy color, is going to make it look even further away. And that's what we want. So these trees are as big as any tree that we would have close to us. It's just that it's far away, so that's all we see. And you can turn your brush around, you can press it more, you can work on the tip. You know, see what kinds of different size blobs you can get. I think a lot of times when beginners start to paint, they think that everything has got to be perfect and realistic. And the thing is, our eyes don't see like that. Our eyes see things far away, kind of fuzzy, and things closer seem bigger and more in detail. And that's what we want to do when we paint. I also want to put a few of these trees over here. I might need to mix up a little more paint, but let's see what we can do here. A little tapping in. Yeah, I think I need to mix up a little bit more. That's all right. You're never going to, it's never going to be a bad thing to get your paint mixing, practice paint mixing. So sometimes you'll have brushes that have long handles, and sometimes you'll have brushes with short handles. And the reason some brushes have long handles is because they're designed to work, to be used at an easel. Generally, your watercolor brushes will have short handles because you typically will work flat when you watercolor. Otherwise, your paint will, you know, go on a little trip without you. It'll slide right down your picture. So that's why your watercolor brushes will generally have short handles. They do make easels that will fold flat, kind of like a table. They're called Lobo easels, and they're very useful if you like to work in various medias. I also have a French easel, which is an easel that has a drawer to put your supplies in that will also go flat. So that's kind of nice if you don't have a lot of space. I really think it's a great idea if you can find a little area in your home or apartment or house or even your garage or shed where you can put your supplies out so that they're always ready to go for you. I think the biggest obstacle that people have in creating is trying to find a place to do it. Okay, so we're going to leave that be, and I want to put a kind of a shrub in here, or like a group of bushes, and I'll show you here on my final piece here. And we've got a bunch of different colors in there. What we're going to do is start off with our lightest color, which is our lemon yellow. Dab, 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 and we're actually going to dab it. We're going to make this nice and big because it's closer to us, so it can be bigger. And don't worry if you have to dab over some of those trees. It's not a big deal. And I'm working on dry paper, okay, because I want to control where my brush strokes go. A little bit more of that. Yellow tends to be a little more opaque, you'll notice, too. So sometimes it seems counterintuitive, but if you need to kind of go over an area, sometimes by having some yellow there, it kind of blocks it out. We're also going to use some yellow ochre. Add some of that in there. It's a little bit thicker. I kind of have it at the thickness of cream. And I think I'm going to do some sap green. So my brush is a little bit drier. I don't want it quite as watery when I'm doing this because I know I have to kind of cover up some stuff. It's not as thick as like an acrylic or anything. I just want to make sure that it's not going to be super transparent. And I'm going to go right in with, I'm going to pick up some blue here. I'm going to go right in with that blue. Right at the bottom of the tree. Got a little low there. When you get paint where you don't want it, find a clean, dry spot in your paper towel, press and lift. See, it disappears like magic. Let me just make sure that you're not getting too much glare there. I want to add some more of that blue shadow in the center of our tree. A little bit up here maybe. Now while this paint is nice and juicy, you guessed it, we're going to scrape in some tree trunks. Now it's kind of interesting. Sometimes when you scrape, you'll actually end up with a whiter, lighter line, and sometimes you'll end up with darker lines. Now see how we have a white line there? That's because I pushed the paint like a squeegee, pushed it like that. But if I turn the knife and go on the edge like this, I get a dark line. We're also going to be painting in some brown branches later after it's dry, but that's going to give us the, give us a nice base to work from. And over here, we're going to do a very similar thing, but we're going to use some shades of brown that we're not adding to this palette at all. In fact, we're not even using that bright red. That's going to come in. We're going to use that in the next lesson. I'm going to take the burnt sienna and I'm going to add some of the blue to it, just like we did for our cloud shadows. It's going to darken it right up. Okay. Now I am going to paint just some dabs over here on this little landmass we have here. So I'm going in with some of the dark first. Then I'm going to go in with some of the brown on its own. Nature comes in all different colors. When you look, you know, if you're driving around or you're going for a nature walk and you look, you're going to see all sorts of different colors and textures. And the more you paint, the more you're going to be aware of that. You know, I think I'm also going to put some of that pretty teal color in that we mixed for the really far away trees. I think that's kind of nice. So I'm going to scoop some of this and add that into the clump of trees. Maybe a little bit more blue on the bottom to help give it some visual weight. And then, again with our palette knife, I'm going to scrape in some branches. Almost like squeegeeing it out a little bit. There. Okay, now we can focus on some of our detail areas in the front. We're going to switch to our smaller round brush, and I'm going to remove this brush from the water because I don't want anything bad to happen to my handles. And I'm going to start by showing you kind of how to get some really fine lines, and we're going to use our yellow ochre. So what I've done is I'm just kind of wetting my brush a little bit, and I'm going to make sure that my paint is not clumpy, but it's creamy. It's like the consistency of half and half, I would say, coffee creamer. And that's what it looks like on our brush. We can actually see the color there. And I'm going to rest my hand on the table. I'm going to use my brush straight up and down, and I'm going to flick. Okay. Now I don't feel like my paint wants to move that well, so I'm going to add a little bit more water to it. And we're going to do it again. We're going to add some more. And we're just flicking. Flick, flick, flick. With some long reeds. And go ahead and practice this on a scrap piece of paper. It could be a newspaper for all that matters, just a place where you can practice it. But then you end up with strokes that are thicker at the bottom and they get finer as they go up. Now we're going to do the same thing with some green. Now when I load my brush, okay, I twirl it and that gives me a fine point. So there's a little brush tip for you there. Literally, a tip on brush tips. Nice fine lines. We're getting the variance of colors and textures. And we are going nice and slow with this because if it's your first time painting, I want to make sure you feel comfortable. And now we're going to take a little bit of that blue and add that right on our brush, the mix that we had made. That teal color is very pretty. We're going to add some of those. Just some fine lines with our teal. It's really exciting when you start mixing colors. You know, you may think, I only have 5 tubes of paint. What am I going to do with this? Once you start mixing them, you'll make hundreds of different colors. I think you'll be a better artist. If you have the lesser amount of paint, you'll actually be a better artist. All right, now I'm going to go in with some of this mix here. Now, since we've only used 5 colors, because of that, our whole painting is harmonious because we aren't introducing anything strange. I think that's what happens. You see that a lot as a mark of an amateur painter. You'll see these kind of colors, and you might not be able to place exactly what's wrong with the painting, but dollars to donuts, it's usually they've just, you know, they didn't mix their black, they just went and grabbed a new black. They just kind of, instead of trying to mix it, they just grabbed one out of the box and use that instead. And there's nothing wrong, and that might be like, you might want to achieve an effect like that to kind of have like a naive look to your painting, and that's fine if that's what you want to do, but it's also nice to know the reason it looks like that. I think anyone should create art however they want. They should use the colors they want, but if you know the rules and what makes something look a certain way, you're going to make better art. So I don't mean to say, I don't want anyone to think, well, I use black, am I awful? No, 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 not at all. But I just want to let you know why some things look a little more harmonious than others. Now I'm going to drag in some shadows using the same colors I've used, and I'm just going to kind of mimic what I've already painted up high, but I'm going to do it in the water. Alright, now I think I want to actually start adding some shadows to the water. I'm going to work over here because it might still be a little wet up there. And for our water shadows, we're going to do the same thing we did for the cloud shadows. We're going to use the Prussian blue and burnt sienna. I already had enough burnt sienna on my palette over here just to kind of dip into that. A little bit heavier on the blue though, because you want to make sure that it's not brown. You want it to definitely be a little more blue. I'm going to switch back to my flat brush, and it should be clean, but I'm just going to double check and soak up some of that color, and then I'm actually going to test it out here because I feel like I need it a little bit darker than that, so a little more blue in there, a little less water. There we go, that's a little better. So remember, those old paintings that didn't come out so hot, save them for first practice. Now I want to make sure that I don't get into the wet painting that I've already done. So I'm just going to kind of deposit some color here. And then I'm using, look how I'm using my brush. I'm not using it like that. I'm using it on its chisel edge. I'm just kind of using some horizontal strokes. I want it to look very natural. I don't want it to be out of place. There's just a little kind of shadows and ripples in the water. And a little bit up there. And that is pretty good. I think maybe a little bit more dark over here towards the front of the picture. There we go, where it's gotten a little bit darker, a little bit in there too. Just trying not to disturb my colors too much that I've already put down, but we're going to add more, so I'm not too worried about it. I don't worry very much when I paint. Alright. Okay, now we're going to let this dry before we move on to our final steps. Okay, I have my brush here, my round, my small number 2 round, and I'm going in with some sap green. I don't want it to be clumpy. Like, that's really clumpy. Can you see my brush there? It's clumpy. So I'm gonna twist that off, make sure there's no big clumps. But I don't want it super watery because I want to make sure it will stand up. And now I'm gonna start adding, flicking some grasses in here in the front. These aren't going to show up super well, but they will give us a little bit of texture, which is what we need. Flick, 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 flick. It's okay to clump a few together and have some kind of tipping over sideways a little bit. You don't want them all lined up like soldiers marching into battle. You want them random looking. Nature is very random. Now I'm going to grab a little bit of the blue mix that we have there and add that in too. I think I need to mix up some fresh. Let's get some of that blue, some of that green. There we go. And I'm going to flick in some of those colors. Remember to lift up as you flick so you end up with finer tips at the end. And then we're going to go in with some brown. It can take a bit to kind of get used to how wet you want your brush. I find just by tapping it on a paper towel, a lot of times it'll get rid of any of the excess water but still leave a lot of my paint there on the brush, so just kind of tap the tip. And we're going to flick that up. That really shows up well because the brown tends to be quite red, this burnt sienna, and so the red and green are opposites on the color wheel, so they make each other stand out a lot. I'll show you something about color wheels in a second, about how to make our neutrals. We made our gray, but I'll show you something cool in a minute. Don't let me forget. I get carried away when I'm painting, and then I think of something that I want to share, so it's like, oh, I got to share that. Don't want to forget. Don't let me forget, guys. Okay, so now I'm going to add kind of like a little bead of this brown here, because I want it to be kind of like dirt at the bottom there. And then I'm just going to kind of flick some of the grasses, the reflections, down into the water. Not a ton, just a little bit. And I want to do the same with some green. So I'm cleaning my brush, drying it because I don't want to get too much water on there. And I'm going to do the green here, just a few little kind of like hairline, just reflections. And sometimes if you move your head or you tip your paper, you'll be able to see a little bit better if you have any wet areas that are kind of giving you some glare. That happens a lot with watercolor. So just by, moving the paper, moving your head. That's why I recommend, if you're going to tape it down, tape it to a board so that you can, even just like a scrap of cardboard, so you can like lift it up and move it around. Okay, we're going to do the same thing over here because we already painted all those grasses on. We're going to do just some reflections there. And I'm going to go in with that color too. Just get a little bit of shadow there. Here we go. And then I feel like maybe I need a little bit more shadow up there in the middle area, so I'm going to take that gray that we already mixed. We still have it on our palette here. I don't clean my palette till I'm completely done a painting, even if it's going to be a couple days before I have to go back. If it's watercolor, all I have to do is wet my brush and dip back in and it's going to be ready to go. So why do all that work again, right? And a little bit more shadow up there, I think. Further away, kind of deeper colors there. And I think that just about does it. Maybe put a couple little dark branches in that tree. Do some burnt sienna here. And there we go. I hope you enjoyed this lesson today, and I hope you try it. It's a great way to get to know your brand new paints from Royal and Langnickel. Now we're going to go on to a little bit more of an advanced tutorial. We're going to paint our dragonfly here, so we're going to be doing a little sketching together, and but the painting actually is a lot quicker on this. It's just the drawing might make you a little bit might feel a little bit like a challenge, but don't worry, I'm going to be here the whole time. I'm not going to leave you hanging, and we can get this done together. Okay, so what we want to do is get your pencil ready. And we're going to sketch out some basic shapes. Now, if you have watercolor pencils, you can go ahead and absolutely use your watercolor pencils to sketch us on. I'm going to use just a regular HB pencil or number 2 pencil. Use whatever you have. I'm going to start by putting in a line to represent the body. Okay. And then I'm going to put in a couple lines going across that first line to just kind of figure out whereabouts I want to have my wings. And I believe there will be a drawing that you can download on the website if you need to. So don't, oh, and this will be in the little painting kit, the little booklet that comes with your set too. So you can always look in there if you bought the set that accompanies this. All right, so now I want to fatten up the body a little bit. And that way I can get a little bit darker with my lines, which I think will help you. And the body's a little segmented kind of, so what I'm doing is just kind of drawing these little body segments. But I know that's the tail area, so I can go ahead and do that. Now here I want to get our wings in, and they're kind of like ovals. I always try to find like the simple shape that that makes sense so that it's not too complicated to draw. And here again, this is kind of like it's almost like a jelly bean actually, kind of shape. Sometimes I just try to look, it's like, okay, maybe the wing is hard to draw, but what does it look like that would be simple to draw? And then we're going to do that again up here. Got that ovally lobe here. Then we've got this one over here. Please feel free to refer to your picture in the on your packaging or in your painting kit. We get the top part of the body there, and then we've got the head. It's got kind of like a little snout, the front of the dragonfly. It's kind of funny, a little snout. Little arms. We have a lot of dragonflies where I live. I live in a very area with a lot of water. So it's fun. It's fun to see them. You go out on a canoe or kayak and they're everywhere. And let's get this leg here, kind of bending back. Gotta draw the rest of this body here. The wings are transparent or translucent, so we can actually see through them a bit. And you know, I think I want to lower this part of the body down. Let me just, sometimes I have to tip it up and look at it at a different angle. I think I need to lower that body down. I'm going to grab an eraser here and just kind of rub that out a bit. That happens, but I didn't put a lot of time in it, so I'm not worried about that. So let's see. That means the top of the body would be there. I always start with just a very loose drawing, so I'm not too upset if that happens. There we go. It wasn't a huge deal. There we go. And then we got these little segments that I want to put in there. Okay. And they almost have these, it almost looks like a little pincher. I don't think it's a pincher, but it just kind of looks that way. All right, and there we have our dragonfly. I think I can actually bring that wing down a little bit. So then if you have like a bunch of wobbly lines like I do, go in and just kind of clear it up with your eraser. Now we can begin our painting. So the first thing we want to do is paint the segments of the body, and we're going to use our number 5 round, and we're going to go ahead and wet this first segment, the body segment, and we're going right over where the wings are. Actually, I think we can probably wet the second segment of the body too. And we're going to grab some sap green, pull my palette over so you can see it a little better, and just throw that right in towards the top. And then I'm going to grab some of the Prussian blue and add it towards the bottom, and just let the colors meld together. And remember, it's going to dry darker. I'm taking some of that Prussian blue and going into the second segment and adding it in there. Also, if you have any rough lines, just load your paint, your brush up with the paint that you're using closest to that area, and just, you can neaten it up. See? It's just because sometimes when you wet the paper, you're not exactly sure where you're going because the water's clear, so that just helps you, it just helps neaten up the edges. It's better when you're wetting an area to go a little bit inside the lines if there's any doubt, rather than to go over it, because then you end up with your color going beyond the edge of your drawing. Alright, the sap green in, and then I also want to add a little bit of yellow, lemon yellow in there, just to kind of liven up that color a bit. So wash your brush, grab some of that yellow. I need some more yellow than that. That wasn't even coming off my brush. There. And then we're going to go on and with the other segments of the body with that same brush. We're going to be mixing that dark color to put it like a pattern over the tail area, but we're not going to worry about that now. So right now we're going in with the blue, Prussian blue. I'm just kind of tracing the top edge of my drawing and letting the paint flow. I'm going a little more than half of the way down with that color. And then I'm just going to go right in with the lemon yellow. I think I'll see if it will mix enough green on its own. Just kind of pushing the colors together. I like to let them mix on the paper a lot of times because you just get such an interesting combination of colors that way. There we go. And now over to the nose. I probably have just about the perfect color to put on the nose right now. The front area, which is that kind of greeny yellow. And then I'm going to go in with some lemon on its own and do these kind of big, they almost look like big eyes. I don't think that's what that is. I don't think these are eyes. I think they're just kind of that shape, but going in with some of that. And some of the other colors spilled in from the body, but that's fine. Not worried about it. And then I'm going to dry my brush off quite a bit because this will help the paint from not flowing too much. Grabbing some yellow ochre, and that is going to go towards the edge here. And then I'm going to paint in the kind of the colored body part of the legs. And I think that's all I need to work on right now until this is dry. Oh, I think I need to actually extend the top of the body a little bit. It looks like it's a little low there. There. Now if you end up with an area where you feel like the paint is dripping a little too far, just go in there with your paper towel. You can blot it. Keep it from moving. And then you can go back in with your other color, just leaving a little bit of a gap in between. So let me do that. Let me go back in with the green there. I got a little carried away. I think actually I might have dropped a little droplet of water on there. I think that's might be what happened. And don't worry about the wings because I'm going to show you how to lift out for the wings in a few minutes. So what I'm going to do now is pause the video and dry this with my hair dryer, and we'll be back. Okay, we're back and the dragonfly's body is dry. I am going to take my flat number 10 brush and I am going to wet the wings, but I'm going to start with these bottom wings because look, I can actually kind of lift up the color and I can use that to paint the other wings. It's just going to give me a really subtle color, which would be kind of hard to control otherwise. So I'm kind of using the paint that's on my paper already in an area I don't want it as a palette, which is kind of nice. Also, go ahead and turn your paper around so that it's easier to work on. Because the wings are kind of like semi-transparent, they kind of have a white veil to them, it's completely, it makes it look more realistic too. Because you kind of see them as like a hazy white over the body, but you can still see the body through it. It's one of those things, you know, the more you look, the more you observe, the more you paint, you'll notice these things in nature. You might need to refer back to the picture on the in the printable booklet that came with your kit if you need to, if you kind of lost your drawing lines when you painted. That happens sometimes. Don't worry about it though. You can always draw it again if you need to. Just get used to the painting techniques today. Okay. And there, just wanted to give it a little bit more color there. Now I also wanted to add a little bit of that blue color, a little bit fresher in my wings. I think I'm going to switch over to the round brush because I feel like I have a little more control, but the flat brush is slightly stiffer, so it's a little easier to lift up the have lifted up the other color. So I'm just making sure the wings are wet, because sometimes things dry really quickly if you've got a lot of lights on, like I do in my studio. And then I'm going to add some of the blue, just really watery, just here and there, just to give it a little bit of a lively color. And then we're going to let that dry. And while that's drying, I'm actually going to clear off my little palette here. It's just a tile from the home improvement store. It just wipes off really easily with some water. And I'm going to mix the really dark color that we are going to use for the details on the tail. If you look here on my sample, we've got this kind of dark patterning on the tail, and we're also using that dark in the face and on the body and also in the legs. So we're going to go ahead and mix that. And that is made with our Crimson Lake Red and our Prussian Blue. We don't want a ton of water, so I'm actually getting a little bit of a gob of paint off my palette so I don't end up getting too much water in there. Cleaning off my brush, dabbing it on a towel off camera just so that I don't introduce too much water, and I'm grabbing some of the blue. And see, I'm going to mix it together. It's going to make a really dark purple, but when I lay it on top of the body, it's going to look almost black. Now I wanted to show you something. I remember I told you don't let me forget. I want to show you something that's kind of neat. Alright, so we're talking about the color wheel like we did here at the beginning of our video. And I showed you kind of three primary colors. We made our green, our orange, and our purple. But if you mix all those three colors, or mix whatever's across from each other on the color wheel, you'll get a nice gray, like a neutral color. So let's do that here on the tile and see what we get. So let me get a little bit of that yellow. And let me get a little bit of that blue so we can mix kind of fresh. Alright, and I've already got some red there, so I'll just grab some of that. We've mixed these colors together. They will make a neutral, either a brown or a gray, depending on how much of what you use. So see that? That's kind of cool, isn't it? So if I paint that right in the middle, and look, we got a beautiful neutral gray from those three colors. So play with your colors, mix them, have fun, maybe get like an inexpensive art journal or something to play in. It's a really great way to learn. Alright, so I just wanted to make sure I didn't forget to tell you that, because I just think it's some really great great info. I also want to put a little bit of red here at the end of the tail. I didn't really notice that at first, and I wanted to make sure I didn't forget it. Okay, so now I want to go in with my nice dark purple that I made. And, oops, you know what? I just noticed I dropped a little bit of water right there. That happens to me. I think I tend to paint larger, and so my brush tends to be a little juicier, and I got a little dark there. I'm going to go ahead and paint, let's see, where do I want to start? I think I'll start up here on the body, and I am just going to kind of put in, there's almost like kind of, it almost looks like armor. You know how the exoskeleton looks on some insects? It's kind of got this little like kind of bubbly look. It's kind of cool, kind of cool, kind of creepy, kind of cool though. And I'm just gonna put that in. So if you can see that, I'll bring it up a little closer for you. And then I'm gonna work down here and just kind of add these like, it's almost just like a splotchy patterning to the body. I'm kind of defining the areas where they segment, kind of like the joints, I guess. It's mostly at the top, and honestly, if you just kind of wiggle your brush, you'll get that really cool natural looking pattern. There's only so much detail you can get into with a really small picture like this. 5 by 7 is pretty small for me. I usually work quite a bit larger. So you just need to suggest it. You don't need to go in with any great amount of detail. Just have to suggest it. And actually it can help you get a little bit of definition against the wings just by putting this patterning on the body. So I've been able to kind of carve the wing out there a little bit, make it stand out a little bit more. Okay, and then I also want some of this on the tip of the leg there, the tip of the, whatchamacallit, tail. So I'm just going to dab that in there. And now I want to work on the head, and I'm going to get some yellow ochre. Dab that off there. Because I feel like it got a little too washed out. So I'm adding some of that on both sides of the things that look like eyeballs but aren't eyeballs, I'm pretty sure. And I'm getting some burnt sienna. I'm going to add that in. And I'm going to get a little bit of sap green. Add some of that in the snout area. I should probably know the, appropriate terms for painting these. Sorry guys. And I'm just gonna kind of, with a damp brush, just soften things a little bit, because I feel like it's a little bold. So because sometimes you're putting stuff on and taking it away, that's kind of how it goes. Now I want to put the shadow under the dragonfly before I go on and add any more detail. I don't want to put the legs in yet because they're going to blur if I do that. So what I'm going to do is, with a clean brush, I'm just adding water around the dragonfly on the ground here. I think my wings are pretty dry. Yeah, my wings are dry. You want to make sure the wings are dry before you do this. Otherwise, you will have a color running into them. And I'm just going to pull this out front a little bit. And again, we want a glossy wet paper here. I'll show you in a second. I'll tip my paper and show you exactly where I've wet it. There we go. Okay, so let me tip it so you can see exactly where I've wet it. And now I'm going to use very watered down, that purple that I mixed, really, really watered down. I'm going to add some of that in there. And I'm also going to add some blue. Super watery though, guys. And it's going to dry a little bit later, so keep that in mind. But I just want it to be kind of like a blush around the dragonfly, just kind of like a little bit of a soft diffused shadow. If you get any hard lines, like right there I have a hard line, what you can do is just clean your brush, just blot it gently on a paper towel, and then just kind of go half on, half off the color and just stroke across it, and that will soften it. Stroke across it. If you get any puddles, which I've got a little bit of puddle there, dry your brush off. Dry your brush off, set it in the puddle, and let it drink up the extra water and paint. Alright, now I'm going to dry this, and we'll come back and finish it up. Okay, our paper's dry, and I've got my small number 2 round, and I'm going to go in and add some detail. And I think I'm going to go ahead, first thing I'm going to do is actually paint the legs as they appear through the wings. And actually, one I didn't draw on, but I would be able to see from the back would be that one. And then I am going to blot it because I don't want it to be as dark as the rest of the wings. Okay, so there we can see that hint of the leg there, but it's not really dark. Now I'm going to go in with my darker color, and you know, I think I'm going to add a little bit of that brown to it because I feel like it's a little too purple. There we go. And I am going to paint in the back leg. I'm going to paint in this middle leg here, and I'm also going to do this little arm and this little arm over there. Look at his little part of his leg there. And any other little details I see on there. I'm not going to get too fussy with it, but I just want to kind of give him kind of an anchor, like he's landing on something, so there's a reason for that shadow. Now I'm going to take some of that purpley color that I just added a touch of brown to, just to kind of deaden the color a little bit, and I'm going to work on the face. I am just going to kind of outline these different like lobes, add the detail. And I'm working just on the tip of the brush so that so that I have some good detail there. Why don't I zoom in a little bit? That might be helpful, huh? There we go. Let's zoom right in there. Okay, so what I'm going to do here is add this like some patterning on the nose. So I'm just throwing those little details in. Now if your paint's too dark, if you look at it like, oh my gosh, that's really standing out, then just tap it with the paper towel. And especially since I'm painting it a little bit bold because I want to make sure you can see it on your computer screen or your TV, however you like to watch these videos. I want to make sure you can see it, so I might be being a little bit more bold than you would be. Now I'm going to take some burnt sienna, and I got it on my brush. I'm going to tap it a little bit because I don't want to have too much, so I'm just tapping it on a towel, getting the extra water out and stuff. And I'm going to add some spots. They're going to be very subtle. You're not even going to be able to see them too much, but they're just going to add that texture to the face that it needs. All right, and now on the wings, zoom out a bit for you. I want to add some of the veining. So, and there's also kind of little bits of that brown color kind of here on the wings. There's that little kind of color there. There's a little bit of brown right there. And then, actually I think I'm going to stick with that brown because I like it. I feel like it's a very neutral color. I'm going to add some of the veins. I'm not going to paint every vein in because then it would look really forced, but I want to add a few in there just so it gives it some interest and you can see that it is in fact, you know, an insect wing. So I'm just kind of trying to accentuate. I'm not trying to add every bit of detail, just kind of give it the effect that it's like a veined wing. Lost and found lines. Alright, I'm going to do the same for these guys up here. Actually, I think I'm going to turn my picture so it's a little bit easier to get these veins in there. And you know, I'm not an insectologist or anything, so I'm just kind of making it up as I go along, you know, from my observations obviously, and just kind of what I also design wise what I feel like the picture needs. So you could always look in the encyclopedia or look on the internet for, you know, reference photos to help you get, you know, proper veinings. Okay, now let's see, what else does this guy need? Anything? I think he looks pretty good. Maybe just a little bit of that dark purple color that I had mixed. I'm thinking I might want to put a little bit of that maybe in at the base of our wings here, because I feel like they need like an anchor point to the body. So I think that will kind of help. Maybe even darken up the edge just a little bit here where I feel like I don't have enough contrast or enough definition. And there, all you have to do now is sign your name and enjoy your artwork. I want to thank you so much for painting with me today. I hope you check out all of the wonderful products from Royal and Langnickel. They have so many kits to help you get started in whatever medium you desire. Please check out my videos on my YouTube channel, youtube.com/thefrugalcrafter, or on my blog, thefrugalcrafter.wordpress.com. I'd love to have you paint and craft with me some more. Thank you so much for watching. For more product information, please visit royalbrush.com.